looking for the will definitely be emailed that after the fact in terms of getting that in your inbox and all of that fun stuff. Cool. So given that it is 7:01, I'm going to go ahead and kind of jump into things just so I can make sure we cover all of the content and that all of you walk away feeling ready for your first or your next conference. Sound like a plan? Gonna go with yeah. Cool. Awesome. Thanks for the thumbs up. So before I jump into anything, I'd like to get to know a little bit more about all of you. So I'd love it if you could all take a moment to share in the chat. Your first name, where you're from, whether you're a student, a teacher, or a parent, and what you're hoping to learn from this webinar. I'd also love to hear from students how much Model UN experience you have. Are you looking to prepare for your first conference? Are you looking to prepare for your second conference? Are you a Model UN expert who's just hoping to hear more tips? All of the above, totally great, and I can't wait to hear more about it. And a huge shout out to Kim Holt. I heard that you're here with some of the Arlington MUN delegates. Super excited to be helping you out and to learn more about the rest of you. Unfortunately, Zoom has changed its settings, so I'm going to exit full screen for just a second so I can see some of these posts in the chat, and then I will resume full screen. Cool. Hi, Shannon. Hi, Justin. Cool. So I see a teacher from Indiana. Awesome. We've got a student from Los Angeles, teacher and coach, Christopher from NOLA. Nice to meet you, Christopher. Chloe from Ontario. Hi, Chloe. Clara from Brazil. We've got a global community here. That's exactly what Model UN is all about, and I love to see it. Avery from Boston. She's preparing for her second conference. Awesome. Students from New Jersey, teachers from across the country, New York. I'm currently in New York. Very cool. A couple of students from Toronto, Oakdale. Awesome. Very cool. Honduras, preparing students for their first conference. Awesome. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into these slides and continue to admit folks as they come in. From this point forward, I won't be able to see the chat while I've got kind of this in full screen. So just a note, but I will come back and check on that chat to make sure I answer all of your questions. And a brief heads up about that. This is Model UN. It's an activity that revolves around diplomacy. So please do be respectful in that chat in terms of using it to ask productive questions and really engaging with the event. Before I jump into anything further, since all of you have introduced yourselves, I will also take a moment to introduce myself to all of you. So that way I'm not just a talking head in the Zoom void. I know it feels like that sometimes, so we're going to try and avoid that. Hi, everyone. My name is Georgina, and I will be serving as your webinar host today. Currently, I'm the program manager for our Model UN Teams program, as well as the community manager with Best Delegate. Now, a little bit about my Model UN backstory and why I'm so excited to prepare some of you for your first conferences and some of you for not your first conferences. So I started doing Model UN when I was in 8th grade. And it wasn't because I was like, I want to learn so much more about global affairs, or I'm so interested in IR and I really want to solve these problems. Well, I kind of read the news at the time. I didn't quite have that passion yet for all of these events and for IR. Rather, I was absolutely terrified of public speaking. So step one, right? I get up in front of more than 5 people, and I'm truly not joking when I say this. My hands would start visibly shaking like crazy. I would then realize my hands were shaking. Enter step 2. My face would turn as red as a tomato. Yes, it is possible. Step 3 from there, I'd want to run off that stage and like try and break Usain Bolt's record. But that's like not something I can do. So bad news all around. I had a friend at the time who was like, hey, you should try this really cool activity called Model UN. Might help you with that confidence, public speaking skills, and you'll have a ton of fun doing it. I walked into that first club meeting and I never looked back. Now, when I attended my first conference, I didn't truly understand what Model UN was, and I'll get into that in a bit. But I fell in love with the activity and wanted to continue to learn more over the course of my high school experience. And that high school experience led me to want to attend Georgetown for university. Throughout my time at Georgetown, I was on Georgetown's Collegiate Travel Model UN team. I served on Secretariat for Georgetown's High School Conference NAMN 3 years in a row, served as head delegate for that travel team my senior year, and my junior and senior years at NAMN, I gave speeches in front of 3,500 people at closing ceremonies. Remember that story I told you about my hand shaking and my face turning bright red? Thanks to Model UN, that did not happen. So my goal today is to prepare all of you to really get to that point someday in your futures, if that's what you're hoping for. After graduating from Georgetown, I spent some time working in India. Then I was with the Peace Corps in Thailand. I was evacuated due to COVID-19, and I've been back with Best Delegate ever since. A little bit more about Best Delegate and why we love teaching Model UN and the impact that we've seen through this activity. Our resources have had over 10 million views, and these are resources I'll be introducing to all of you, and they definitely work when it comes to preparing. We've had over 100 countries represented by our Model UN community in terms of students who have attended our programs over the last 12 years. And we also consistently get a 4.8 out of 5 rating from our participants, showing that our programs really do provide a great Model UN opportunity, which we also strive to do in terms of these free webinars. Now, what you can expect from tonight's event, I know that this is kind of the moment you've all been waiting for. First, I'm going to overview our new Preparing for Model UN Conferences guide. We update this guide every year, and this event is framed around the aspects within that guide. So I'll overview what the guide looks like, and then I'm going to walk you guys through that preparation checklist step by step. So show you exactly how to prepare for your first or next conference in less than 2 hours, which may sound like a really big goal. It's possible. Then I'll answer your many questions. I know there were some submitted. I'll check the chat later, and then I'll provide some additional resources. With that, quickly overview our Preparing for Model UN Conferences guide, which will kind of frame what you can expect in terms of the rest of this event. We've got a great step-by-step guide, how to prepare for both virtual and in-person Model UN conferences. So once you receive this guide, which you'll receive via email by the end of this week when we send out the event recording, however, I will share with you last year's version before the end of this event. This guide overviews exactly what happens in a Model UN committee, what Model UN is, what key terms you should know before going into any Model UN committee. So what the chair is, what parliamentary procedure is, and basic terms from that parliamentary procedure. It'll also give you this great checklist, which is what I'm going to overview when it comes to the remaining portions of this event. There's also hyperlinks that kind of get you to demo speeches. We've got demo resolutions. There are QR codes you can scan. Essentially, this guide is so much more than a guide and a fantastic tool that after this event will help you prepare. So in terms of the first elements of the checklist in that guide that fall outside of that prep portion, so I'll go over these now in terms of the overview. The first 2 steps to preparing for any Model UN conference, but particularly your first one, you're going to want to learn the basics of Model UN. In order to do Model UN, you should probably have a sense of what Model UN is and a little bit about how it works. So I'm going to overview this now in terms of how to familiarize yourself with Model UN. And then from there, you maybe want to dive deeper on it. Learn more so that you're really confident in exactly how this activity works. For those of you wondering, what exactly is Model UN? How does this activity work? What on earth is going on? Not really sure how I got here. Model UN is a fantastic speech and debate activity in which all of you, the delegates, so the students in the room, get to step into the shoes of a world leader or a particular country to tackle one of today's biggest global challenges. Feel free to throw some global challenges you've seen in the news lately in the chat, and I will see them later. But these could range from climate change to COVID-19 has been top of mind for a while, to systemic issues across the country, across the world, natural disasters, nuclear disarmament. Anything that you can think of, you can probably debate it in terms of Model UN. And each participant who does Model UN learns a ton of key skills that help you guys in Model UN, in your high school experience, in college, getting into college, beyond college. So public speaking, diplomacy, teamwork, leadership, advocacy, all of the skills that will help you lead in Model UN and beyond. So Model UN can be broken down into 5 stages. And as we get to the preparation checklist right after this, you'll see exactly how that preparation checklist is lined up to fit in with these 5 stages. So research, debate, negotiate, resolution, and action. You do your research before the conference, and then you get there and you deliver your opening speeches. So you begin to debate this topic. From there, you negotiate with one another to form blocks or groups of countries that work together in terms of writing resolutions to take action on the global issue at hand. Then you add in parliamentary procedure to the mix. So kind of the formal language that the United Nations itself uses in terms of really going about debating these issues and bringing countries together to solve them. So these are just formal words that you become familiar with as you do Model UN. Now, to get to the point of this webinar in which you're going to be trained on how to do Model UN in terms of preparing for Model UN in 2 hours or less, step by step. But before I do that, I'm just going to take a quick moment to check on the chat and make sure that everything's looking the way it should. Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay. And I'm sorry that I can't check that while I have the slides running. So in terms of how to prepare for 2 hours or less, and this checklist is exactly what you'll see in that guide. So these are steps 3 through 8 because we already did steps 1 and 2. Awesome. So you're going to want to get your assigned country and read the background guide. Then you research your committee topic. Then you research your country profile and your country policy. Once you've learned about the topic and about your country, that's when you want to start to think about, what am I going to do to solve this problem? So you begin to brainstorm your solutions. After you've done all of that, you've essentially finished the majority of the research work, which leads you to those final 2 items, preparing your opening speech, big moment, and then reviewing how to write a resolution, or that main document that contains your solutions that you're hoping to pass. And it's that document that helps you stand out in committee in terms of really getting that passed, helping the chair to see you as a leader. In terms of going through these steps, obviously, I could do this without a committee and a topic, but it's more fun this way. Let's get into the Model UN spirit. So as of now, welcome to the UN Social, Cultural, and Humanitarian Committee, aka SOCUM. And our topic for this training webinar is going to be natural disasters. So with that, we are all attending this here Model UN conference, aka my training webinar. Welcome to my SOCUM committee, and we will be discussing the topic of natural disasters, which has been in the news a lot recently, so hopefully something you all have maybe a little bit of background knowledge on. So to get into the first real preparation step when it comes to getting excited about this committee and feeling confident about your prep work. Now that we've got our committee topic, we know what we're debating. The next step is to be assigned your country, so the country that you'll represent when discussing natural disasters. And then you're definitely going to want to read the background guide. 10 out of 10 recommend reading the background guide that's given to you. Now, in terms of why you might want to read that background guide and what you're looking for inside of that document. Background guides are so helpful because they provide a super easy framework for understanding the topic at hand. So as you read through the background guide, you're going to want to read the topic background, learn a little bit more about natural disasters, in this case, from the perspective that the chair is looking for. So it'll tell you exactly how the people who designed this committee see this issue being talked about, and a little bit of really easy background for you to wrap your head around. Then it'll get into past international action. So what the UN and other countries have already been trying to do to solve this problem. Many global issues already have a number of solutions out there. However, they might not be working as well as they should be, but take a look at those past international actions. Then it'll give you subtopics to consider. So specific elements of this greater issue that you should be thinking about when it comes to debating it. So rather than just debating natural disasters, you might also want to talk about some of the implications when it comes to, say, humanitarian emergencies after natural disasters. You might want to talk about risk preparedness and reducing the risk that these threats might cause. After that, there's going to be possible solutions. They give you ideas for how to solve this problem. Use them. It's easy. And then finally, questions to consider. So it'll prompt your thinking in terms of where to go with this. Now, to continue this example, since I figured a majority of you would be US-based, our country in this Natural Disasters Committee, as I continue to go through this, is going to be the United States. I'm hoping that some of you might be able to chime in, give me a little insight when it comes to going through these next stages. So now we've got our country, and we've hopefully read our background guide. We know a little bit about natural disasters from recent events and all of that. After this, you're going to want to dive a little bit deeper into that committee topic. So in this case, learn as much as you can in a brief amount of time about natural disasters beyond what's simply given to you in that background guide. So in terms of how to think about researching a topic, like what exactly am I supposed to look for when I'm thinking about natural disasters? Great question. First, define the problem. Figure out why exactly is this a global issue? What about natural disasters in this case represent a threat to the stability and security of the international community. So define exactly what the problem is. Once you know what the problem is, figure out what is causing it. It is hard to solve a problem without knowing why it's happening. So identify causes. You also want to think about the effects, and that relates to some of the reasons why this continues to be a global challenge. So what happens after this thing happens, right? So what are the impacts and effects of natural disasters? So when thinking of effects, one of the immediate effects of a natural disaster might be a certain level of expected destruction. That's an immediate effect. But from there, also think about the longer term impacts and implications. So say that you're thinking about natural disasters cause destruction. In the long term, that destruction might cause mass migration, or it might cause an economic downturn because of the amount of destruction that took place. Those long-term impacts are also going to be important when you're thinking about your solutions. Now, if you have absolutely no idea where to start when it comes to researching the topic, use the citations in the background guide. Typically, those are written using really awesome resources, so they're a really good place to get started in terms of finding those sources. So now we've got our country, we have read the background guide, and we know a bit more about natural disasters. It's time to learn a bit more about our country, in this case, the United States. So you want to research both your country profile and your country policy. And I will explain the difference between these two things pretty much right now. What I mean by your country profile. This is like, I'm going to feel old when I say this. This is like when you imagine a Facebook profile, which I know that like none of you have anymore, but like your generic example profile, right? It's the most basic information that you can gather about a country to figure out why that country works the way it does, why it has certain opinions, what makes this country tick, what is this country all about? So key elements when learning about the basic profile of your country. You want to know what type of government your country has. Is it a democracy? Is it a republic? Is it a federal republic? Is it on the more authoritarian scale? Figure out the type of government you have. Then figure out who are your allies. And this will help you when it comes to negotiating with other countries. Which countries does your country tend to work with? In the case of the United States, this is typically going to be kind of closer countries in the North America region. We've got a lot of Western Europe going on and certain other countries across the globe. To find allies, you can look toward regional organizations your country is in and a couple of other places along those lines. Figure out your geography. It's good to know where your country is located. Just generally speaking, you can figure out which countries are near you, which issues you might be facing, and learn a little bit more about your country's economy. Does your country have a large, stable economy? Can they pay money to help others solve this problem? Or does your country need help when it comes to funding? Now, a great place to actually start your research, and I will share the link to this in a bit, is the Best Delegate Research Map, which is this photo on the right. It is an interactive map with pins on every single UN member state, which is really awesome. They are color-coded by UN regional group, and when you click the pin, it gives you a ton of helpful links in terms of information about your country. Once you've learned the most basic details about your country, you should probably go about learning your country's policy, which is essentially what your country believes we should do about this global issue. So in the case of our example, where does the United States stand when it comes specifically to the topic of natural disasters? We've got this great little saying that's going to help you remember this. When you're hunting for your country policy, you need a spear. Ha, 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 ha. So funny, yay. No chuckles, really? Thanks guys, cool. So in terms of what I mean by a spear to help you find your country's policy, this stands for speeches, programs, events, agreements, and reports. And all of these will help you figure out where your country stands. So speeches by the leader of your country. They will show you your country's policy. You can find the text, you can watch them on YouTube, figure out what your country leader sounds like, all of that fun stuff. Or speeches your country has made at the UN. You also want to look toward programs. So what specific programs exist that handle this issue? Is there an education program, for example? Is there a program that brings different NGOs together? You're going to want to look toward events. What events has your country attended that relate to this topic? Any big global conferences, any big global meetings, which ones have they been to? And then agreements. Which agreements have they signed? There are tons of major international treaties. By figuring out which agreements they support, it'll help you figure out what they want to do about this topic. And then last but not least in SPEAR, reports. The UN produces reports on the progress it makes on every program and resolution it has ever produced. I'm sure that a lot of you have seen those climate reports that have been published over the last few years. Those tend to hit the news real big now and kind of make me worried for the state of the planet, but that's why all of you are doing Model UN. Yay. So look at those reports to get statistics and data about progress made in terms of those solutions. A great way to think about this too. The UN hosts a ton of events, there's a COP summit happening right now. There's also the G20, which isn't necessarily UN-based, but all of that. At each of these events, they don't just want to talk about these things, right? They tend to produce agreements at events. So for example, the Paris Climate Agreement came out of a COP summit, right? So there's an environmental summit, and then they produce the Paris Climate Agreement, which then produces reports. So if you find one major UN event, you'll probably find a resolution that was written as well as reports about it, research. In terms of finding these websites, the best way to go about searching for them is to power search. So I'm sure that you all may have noticed by now, and if you haven't, I'm sorry for bursting your bubble. When you Google things, it is hard to get the results you're looking for. Half the time I Google something and Google gives me 500,000 results and the first 10 are ads. And I'm perhaps not that. And definitely not Wikipedia, which I'm sure your teachers have already told you. So you're going to want to power search, which is essentially typing this here at the bottom into Google. So cite:(UN.org) space the name of your country, space your topic. What this does is it filters Google and only gives you results that are on the UN website. So basically, you can hack Google, make sure you get the right results. Definitely keep this in mind. Okay. So where are we at now in terms of our prep? We have our committee, we have our topic, we've read the background guide, we have our country, we've learned about the topic, and we've learned about our country. So I think it's time to move on to the next step. The next step is going to be actually getting into brainstorming the solutions that you want to lobby for and advocate for over the course of this committee. So you've thought about your country's policy, but what solutions do you want to bring in to help solve this global issue? And Model UN is all about these solutions. It's solution-oriented. We don't just sit around talking about problems. That would be very disheartening. We're all about solving them. So how do you actually go about thinking of solutions, especially given that these problems haven't been solved yet, right? So if world leaders are having a hard time, maybe we are, except no, we are not. So in terms of key elements for brainstorming your solutions, step 1, look at the list of issues that you identified. So this goes back to your research about the topic. What were the main issues here? Then, once you've got those issues, use SPEAR again to find specific solutions to the issues that you found. So hunt for the solutions that your country supports using that same SPEAR. Ha 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 ha. So now you've got these solutions that you support. From there, figure out, are these working, right? This is clearly still a global problem if we're talking about it, which means that they're probably not working as well as they could be. So once you know which solutions might be working well, which ones are not working well, that's where you take those solutions that aren't working and make them better, or you create your own. But there is literally no need to reinvent the wheel here, right? You don't need to come up with this crazy out-of-the-box solution. All you need to do at its most basic level is figure out, how can we make what's already happening better? And if you can come up with a crazy out-of-the-box solution, please do. I am all here for it. Can't wait to see it. Now, what this looks like in terms of breaking it down a little further in a flowchart, I kind of think I showed you guys earlier. So you start off with your topic on the top. So in this case, natural disasters. You're going to want to put your issues underneath that. So we took natural disasters, and I decided that a big issue that is causing natural disasters is climate change. So maybe I want to figure out addressing climate change on the whole. Another issue related to natural disasters is that countries don't tend to be prepared for them. Is there a better way for us to assess the risk beforehand and be prepared? When it comes to the United States has this really interesting policy of erecting a lot of storm barricades. They've been talking about doing this again after Hurricane Ian in terms of really creating those support structures. But is that working? Has this worked in the past? Is there a better way to create barriers to stop impending storms? Or should we be doing something else? Thinking about that is a task that I will leave up to all of you. From here, at this stage, you've basically finished all of your research. Not too hard, right? But we've got 2 prep steps left. So at this stage, you have like all of the research you might hypothetically need to feel ready in terms of walking into this committee and being like, I am the United States. I am so ready to solve natural disasters. Climate change is an issue. Storm barriers are an issue. Risk preparedness is an issue. And this is what we're going to do about it. That is what your opening speech is for. And just a note, because I know that we got this question beforehand, most opening speeches in Model UN are 1 minute, but throughout a Model UN committee, speeches can range from 30 seconds to about a minute, depending on the speaking time. That covers a pre-submitted question. Cool. Now, how exactly does one write an opening speech in 1 minute? 1 minute, not a ton of time, right? So a really great public speaking structure to consider when it comes to writing your opening speech and feeling really confident about presenting that. You're going to want to use hook, point, action. So when it comes to delivering any speech, first off, your opening speech, but this actually applies to like any speeches any of you will give after this webinar, I hope, attempt to use hook, point, action. Now, what I'm going to do for just a sec to make this a little interactive while I have a sip of water. What do you guys think I mean when I say start off with a hook? What exactly is a hook? What might I mean by starting off your speech with a hook? Post it in the chat. I'll see if we get it right. Ooh, nice. All right. You guys totally nailed that. Now, oh, you can't see the next slide. Awesome. I'm loving this. Okay. Yes. So essentially your hook at the start of your speech, you want to immediately grab the audience's attention. In any Model UN committee, there are typically a whole bunch of delegates, right? Model UN wouldn't work if it was just you debating this issue by yourself. That would be kind of counterproductive. So there are going to be a lot of delegates, which means that the chair or the person running the committee is about to hear a whole lot of speeches about natural disasters, somewhere between probably like 20 of them and 190 of them. By speech probably 30, a lot of speeches are going to start to sound the same. Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, here's what I think we should do. By starting off with a hook, if you are speech number like 20 and you start off with a hook and nobody before you has, immediately that chair is going to zone in and be like, I want to know what this person is talking about. So in terms of how do you grab the audience's attention? What makes a good hook? How do I get people to listen to me? All really great questions. So some examples of great hooks. You might want to start off with a thoughtful quote, a quote that maybe a lot of people know, something that'll get them kind of reminded of the topic and something that people identify with. One that comes up a lot is be the change you wish to see in the world. However, that one is actually slightly overdone at this point, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because of the frequency at which it is used. But there are tons of other great and memorable quotes out there from world leaders to advocates. Use those to start your speech if it's something that relates to your country policy, because don't fix what isn't broken. You could also ask a question. So one that I heard from a student on our Model UN teams last night, can you imagine a world without glaciers? I kind of can't. That'd be kind of sad, and that's related to the topic of climate change. Ask a question and pause that gets people thinking, and that way they'll want to hear your answer to that question. You could also start off with a surprising statistic. Another one that I've heard recently in terms of committees about, again, climate change, a lot of statistics related to the immense flooding in Pakistan that's happened over the last couple months. They've never seen anything like that, and those floodwater levels were absolutely unimaginable. Starting off with that statistic and then getting into why we need to solve climate change if you're Pakistan is a really great way to get people to listen to you, to overview your country policy, and show why this issue is important. Or you can start off with a very short story. something that relates to an experience about the topic, and something that really gets people listening. So once you've grabbed their attention, the next step in your opening speech is going to be your point. Now, in your opening speech, your point is to share your country's policy. I wonder why we were researching that. Wow, all of this research, you just put it straight in your speech. It's awesome. So you're going to want to state your country's policy. Now, here's the thing. As I said, 1 minute is not a very long time. So it is better to say one thing well than many things poorly. I have done this myself back when I was just getting started, and I've seen so many people fall into the trap of, I want to say everything I found out about my country. So for example, when it comes to natural disasters, the United States firmly believes that we should do this, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this, and we should do this. I don't need to hear your entire grocery list of country policy. And after a certain point, that becomes hard to follow. So have a clear 1-sentence main point, and then maybe 2 to 3 supporting points. Essentially make sure that you get to the point, the people hear it, the people understand it, and that you get that argument across. Now, the final step in your opening speech, can somebody remind me in the chat, even though I can't see it? We've got our hook, we've got our point. What does our opening speech end with? I'm actually going to check. And I just switched the slide. Awesome. Nice. Action, action. Love that. Cool. So yes, your opening speech should end with a call to action. You want to tell the audience exactly what to do. Leave them thinking about your speech. Leave them thinking about that action item in a way that makes them want to go back and do that. So for example, your call to action could be to support your country's policy or support this awesome solution that you've thought of that you're really excited to write down in your resolution. Another great call to action, and this works for in-person conferences and virtual conferences. Tell people where to find you during the first unmoderated caucus, aka get yourself allies right off the bat. For an in-person conference, say, meet me in that corner of the room if you'd like to talk about this. For a virtual conference, say, meet me in breakout room, insert breakout room number here, or however that conference is doing it. Tell people where to find you, how to work with you. And essentially, that'll ensure that people remember you, send you notes, and want to continue to work with you over the course of a conference. So basically, you've got this. In terms of writing that opening speech, ensure you've got a hook, you've got a point, and maybe 2 to 3 supporting points, and then finally, a call to action. Now, we are 1 step away from being prepared for Model UN in 2 hours or less, and then from there, I should have about 15 minutes to answer all of your many questions. So stay tuned and also start thinking about questions you may have that were not pre-submitted, and that way I can also make sure that I get to them. For the final step in terms of this preparation process, you're going to want to review how to write a resolution. Even if you are super duper confident in resolution writing, this is still worth reviewing because your goal in any Model UN conference, and this kind of leads into how to win awards if you're at that level yet. You want to be the one who's leading on solutions to this problem. The resolution is the document that solves this problem. So if the chair can see that you were a leader when it came to writing this resolution, when it came to coming up with really sustainable solutions, that's what's going to lead you on the path to awards, especially if you can make sure that it's clear that those solutions came from you and that you helped to bring out the best in your fellow delegates as you did so. So how exactly do we write a resolution? I'm going to review it with all of you now as quickly as possible. A resolution is one long document that solves this here global problem that is actually kind of 1 sentence in terms of formatting in 3 parts. So the 3 elements of any Model UN resolution, and you can see an example on this screen as well. It starts off with a header, then has preambulatory clauses, and then operative clauses. For those of you who may have never done Model UN before and have never heard the words preambulatory or operative clauses before, have no fear. I hadn't heard these before my first conference, so like, you're all already ahead of me. Go you, you're doing awesome. So an easier way to break this down as well. You can kind of think about this like any paper you've ever written for school. So in terms of your header, and as you can see from the example on the left of the screen, it starts off with the committee. In the case of a school paper, that's the class that you're in. Then it gets into the topic. In the case of a school paper, that's the assignment. Then it has a list of sponsors. This is like when you put your name on your paper for school so your teacher knows that you wrote it. The list of sponsors is the list of students or delegates who worked to write this resolution together. So essentially the students who are responsible for putting all of these solutions into this document. Then after that, you're going to essentially lead into signatories. So this is like where you'd put your teacher's name who wants to read your work. These are the people who want to hear this resolution presented. So they may or may not agree with your ideas, but they want you to present it. The next portion after your header is going to be your preambulatory clauses. And OMG, we covered all of this during the research. Isn't it amazing how that works? So in terms of what exactly are preambulatory clauses, what is this big word? This is like the introduction to the paper you write for school. So it's going to describe the issue that you plan on solving. And it might also get into past international actions, which is still part of your introduction for your paper at school. So what has the world already been doing to solve this? What does the world believe is a good idea that's already been happening? And then also, what are the issues at play? In terms of formatting, which is always something to keep in mind, the first word is always going to be italicized and they end with a comma. So just keep in mind in terms of formatting, if you happen to forget the formatting, I'm sure there'll be someone at your next conference who can help you. And here are two examples on the bottom. So the first one in terms of this here natural disasters topic we've been discussing. Alarmed by the rising frequency of natural disasters. That addresses one of the issues. There have been far more natural disasters in recent years than there have in the past. And then the second one, reaffirming the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal agenda. That hits on a past international action in terms of one that's really being spearheaded by the international community. After your introduction or your preambulatory clauses, that's where you're going to get into your operative clauses. So back to the paper at school, this is kind of the meat of your paper. So the argument that you are trying to make as to how on earth we should go about solving this big global issue. And hint, all of your arguments are valid, and once you pass one of these, you'll have the awesome feeling of having saved the world. So these contain your group's solutions to the topic at hand. And just a note, you write all of these resolutions together. So you're not going to have to write this by yourself. You will write this collaboratively with other delegates in the committee. However, as I said, you should strive to lead on these in terms of being solution-oriented and bringing people together. In terms of formatting, the first word is underlined. They all end in semicolons, except the last one that ends in a period because a resolution is one really long sentence grammatically, and they are numbered. So here are two examples. Recommends that member states create adaptive natural disaster preparedness plans and encourages countries to include environmental education in national curricula. This first operative clause addresses an issue I mentioned earlier, which relates to risk management. And the second one kind of ties into making sure that we're prepared in the future. So when it comes to operative clauses as well, you want to strive to ensure that you solve every issue that you've addressed in your preambles. And you want to make sure that you have more operative clauses than preambulatory clauses, because you want more solutions than issues, absolutely. That's kind of what's going to make you stand out, and we want to walk away having solved this global problem. All right, with that, you've got this. Those are all of the steps you need, and that is pretty much everything you need to know in terms of getting ready for a Model UN committee and feeling prepared and having everything you need in 2 hours or less. So just to review, we had our topic, right? We are kind of in this Natural Disasters Committee or SOCUM. From there, we got our assigned country, so the United States, and we read the background guide. Cool stuff, looking for certain elements in that. Then we researched the committee topic. We got into the country profile and policy. We started to brainstorm some solutions. Then we wrote a 1-minute opening speech, and then we reviewed how to write resolutions. Pretty simple, right? Yeah, we're feeling good about this. Can I see some like thumbs up emoji reacts? Are we feeling ready to prepare for Model UN committees, or at least more ready than we were before? Awesome, that's what I love to see. Okay, and so again, you're prepared for all of these 5 stages with that information. Now what I want to do is take some time to answer all of your many questions. So I'm going to unshare my screen for this portion just so that I can pull up additional documents, make sure I get to everyone, and make sure that I can see the chat at this stage to answer any questions that you have. So feel free to start kind of posting questions in the chat if you have them. I see questions about accessing the recording as well as slides. In terms of slides, we can't actually share these slides. However, we will have the recording posted and the slides will be in the recording, if that makes sense. So like, if you want to use the slides, you can kind of use the recording without the volume on, all of that fun stuff. So yes, this event is being recorded and you can access all of this later. Cool. So what I'm going to do is start off with some of the questions that were pre-submitted and get into those. And then from there, I will get into the conference or into the ones in the chat. Yes. Okay. Cool. So in terms of questions that were pre-submitted from all of you, I'm going to start off with the questions related to preparation, then get into selecting conferences, then get into questions related to what happens when you're attending conferences, and then kind of go through everything that's left in that order. So one of the first questions that I got was, how do I get my team started? My team doesn't have any veteran students, so how do I even go about getting them prepared, given that there aren't experienced students? And this came from Robert. This has been true for a lot of Model UN teams over the past couple of years, especially given COVID-19. There were a ton of teams that kind of wound up falling off just given those student numbers. However, we've seen so many of those teams come back successfully over the past few years. So when it comes to really getting beginners started, the best way to learn Model UN is actually by doing Model UN, whether that be through mini simulations with your students. A great idea for a mini simulation for beginners is one that we call fruits and vegetables. It's super duper simple. So you introduce it by saying, welcome to the UN cafeteria, right? All of the United Nations delegates are hungry because there is no food in the UN cafeteria, and hangry delegates cannot solve global problems. So your job is to create a salad for these delegates. So you ask every student to pick a fruit or a vegetable and think of 3 reasons why that's the best fruit or vegetable to include in the salad. They all give their opening speeches, then you put them in groups together to write salad recipes, and then they present them. That's essentially Model UN as soon as they vote on it. So they debate, they negotiate, they write resolutions, which are salad recipes, and then they vote. It's a super easy way to introduce students to these stages and steps while removing kind of the slightly more complex political elements / IR elements. So definitely mini sims, as well as a ton of practice activities. Another great recommendation is to attend a training level conference. There are a ton of training level conferences out there that are specifically designed to teach new delegates parliamentary procedures step by step, including our virtual conferences, and make sure that students really get involved. So definitely use those kind of initial opportunities to get students excited about Model UN by doing Model UN. It's a great way to get that engagement as well. Another question related to prep, and this came from Amy. How can I structure my practice sessions? What should each team meeting look like, and how should we go about practicing? So like I said, the mini sim route is a great way to go on every once in a while in terms of really using that entire session to walk through the entire process of Model UN. In terms of other ways to structure sessions, a great way to do it to maintain student engagement, get everyone talking about these events. You could start off by having a current events discussion, assign a student to come in with a news article, or just chit chat about what's happening in the world. Many of what kind of pops up in the news on those push notifications, those will probably be topics that you'll encounter at some stage. Then from there, I would go into a mini lesson, something specifically focused on the skills that tie to those 5 stages. So either focus on a research skill, focus on a specific public speaking skill, focus on a specific negotiation skill, and then have an activity right afterwards that really allows them to put that into practice. So again, making it interactive, really focusing on activities while still overviewing these really important elements and these key skills. It's a great way to keep it fun as well as get everybody else involved. I'm looking at the questions in the chat before I continue, just a second. These are coming in fast. Okay, so a clarification regarding preambulatory and operative clauses. So preambulatory clauses is simply the word that describes like each of those sentences that I showed you in the example. So that one sentence like affirming the SDG agenda, that is one preambulatory clause. It's just a fancy parliamentary procedure word, and you get used to these the more that you do Model UN. But definitely try and look into these key terms. Awesome. So another great question, what should I do when representing a country that has recently changed leadership? So recently changed president, recently changed party, and recently had a shift that might definitely change your country policy. you're definitely going to want to look into what that new leader was elected on, especially if the shift was recent, because most probably it's going to lean towards that new leader's policy versus what happened formerly. A really great example to kind of go back to the United States and climate change, right? Under the Trump administration, the United States pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and that is a landmark document when it comes to climate change. So the United States' policy under the Trump administration greatly shifted when it came to climate change. Once Joe Biden came into office, that entire new Trump policy was flipped on its head. Climate came back onto the radar. That's a really easy way to think about it in terms of leader switching equals policy switching. So make sure that you look at the most recent leader, and that'll probably give you the most up-to-date info. So to get back to the questions that I was asked beforehand, is there a timeline to follow in terms of preparation? So I gave you a great kind of way to do it in 2 hours externally, but in terms of thinking of weekly meetings leading up to a conference, you should definitely consider maybe having like a 4-session or 5-session prep cycle leading up to the conference in which you can hit on each of these key skills, allow time maybe for a mini sim, and allow time for students to workshop and research. Now, what I will say is most conferences will give you the committees and kind of the topics well beforehand, but you might not get your country until about a month before. So usually you've got about a month's notice once you get that country. Say that you don't have your country yet. You can still research the committee and the topic. Have your students do a mini sim on the topic, random countries. And then once you get that country, that's when you start to really dive deeply in terms of that country prep specifically. In terms of next questions, Francesco asked, how should we organize our research in order to better access and use it? That is a great question, considering you might have a whole bunch of research in those 2 hours. I don't know how fast you are. You might have tons of research and nothing to do with it, or it might be disorganized. A great way to think about organizing your Model UN research. A lot of delegates create what is known as a research binder. So quite literally like a physical binder that is organized into different sections with a cover page that helps you figure out what's what. If your research binder is large enough, you might want to consider having tabs that point to, this is information about the topic. This is information about my country profile. This is my country policy. These are my solutions. So definitely organize that research binder in the way we just organized this for you in terms of being able to navigate it. And something else to keep in mind too, in terms of like conference policies, some conferences allow laptops and others do not. If you are attending a conference and like all of your research ever is on your laptop, but it's in person and you're not sure if you can use your laptop, send an email and ask them so you don't accidentally have all of your research stuck on your laptop that you are just completely unable to access. Cool. Okay. So in terms of the next question, this one's easy. Is there a guide for crisis? Yes, I will share the link to that at the end. Further questions. So this is going to get into selecting the right conferences to attend, which again ties into all of this prep. How do I find the right conferences to attend? Great question. So we've got a really helpful conference database that can help you find middle school conferences, high school conferences, university conferences, and specifically can be filtered for your local area, for virtual versus in-person conferences. And I will share all of these links at the end. It's just a little difficult when it's me and the whole screen. So definitely use conferences databases. If you've got a ton of new students and maybe some experienced students, also consider kind of mixing up your conference flow. Maybe have some small local conferences that are better for newer students in terms of having less people in each committee, being slightly less competitive, and more into kind of teaching students how to do Model UN. And again, there are also great virtual training conferences for that. And virtual conferences are also fantastic in that they're easy to slot in for your schedule. You might also want to think about some of those big invitational conferences, maybe 1 or 2 a year for your more advanced delegates or to get students really involved. So a 4-day overnight conferences run by a major university, for example, that'll really help your students to get that full 4-day experience. So basically, when it comes to selecting conferences, there is no one right answer, but try and mix it up so that your students get the best of the whole experience. Virtual, in-person, advanced versus kind of novice, and all of that fun stuff. Checking the chat again, give me a second. Oh, good one. Okay. Rebecca M asked, how do I find information about more closed countries such as North Korea? That is a very good question. So even kind of countries like North Korea, there are still times that they have engaged in terms of international events. So when it comes to North Korea, the topic that you would most commonly see that country assigned out in is probably going to be nuclear disarmament. When it comes to their country policy, look toward the recent nuclear summits that they did participate in before they went back to nuclear testing recently. And then maybe try and figure out why those kind of nuclear disarmament talks didn't lead to disarmament. That'll give you some insight into their country policy. You can also look at if like a country's leader has ever tweeted. Technically, those tweets are like official record and may or may not be that country's policy, depending on where that information comes from. So in terms of closed off countries, get a little creative about it, and that information is definitely going to be out there. It might just be a little harder and you might have to be sneaky. But again, there are always ways to find this information when it comes to kind of figuring out these more closed countries. Another great question I got, what is the difference between in-person and virtual conferences? Overall, the only difference is that one looks like this on a Zoom grid where it's many squares, and the other one, the human beings are all together in a room doing the Model UN thing. But in terms of the experience, there is very little difference between the two at this stage, which is actually super exciting given that virtual conferences break down a ton of barriers to entry and in fact are a really easy way to get involved, especially for students' first conferences who might be a little shyer and just not love the idea of being in a room with like 300 other people. So in terms of virtual conferences as well, and ways that those can really kind of bring in that Model UN atmosphere, a ton of virtual conferences will have students change their virtual backgrounds to their country flags and things like that. So it really does become still just as interactive and really is a very similar experience, just one is online and one is in person. Virtual conferences, easier to attend, make great training conferences. All right, I'm going to the chat. This is another one. So John asked, are all of the countries assigned to delegates related to the topic or issue, or are they just random countries assigned to people at random? Typically, / all of the time, this is true for our conferences, and I believe this is true across the board. When they design committees, they design a matrix or a list of countries to assign out that are absolutely related to that committee. They will not throw a random country into a committee if the country has absolutely nothing to say about it. But here's the thing, most countries have something to say about most global issues. And you may find yourself assigned someday to a country that you're like, I know very little about this country, or to a country that compared to your United States and China might seem like a very small country. For example, say that you're assigned Costa Rica. Costa Rica, pretty small country, but when it comes to environmental conservation and sustainability, Costa Rica is doing a really good job and are a phenomenal country to represent because they've got really awesome solutions that these here big countries, they're not doing that right now. So sometimes the smaller countries are absolutely to your advantage. You'll learn something new. You'll find creative solutions. You'll think of a new way to do this and see things from a new perspective, which is exactly what Model UN is all about. I've also seen a question about position papers. In terms of position papers, that research stuff that I overviewed actually sets you up in terms of setting up that position paper perfectly. Position papers, you kind of want to hook, point, action that as well. So the same as your opening speech. For those of you who are like, what is a position paper? She's 5 steps ahead of herself. A position paper is requested by some conferences before the committee. So they'll ask you to provide them with a 1-page paper that states your country's position on the topic. So they have a little more insight into where you're coming from over the course of committee. In terms of your position paper, you want to briefly outline the topic at hand and why it continues to be a global issue. Then you want to outline your country's policy, where your country stands in terms of solving this global issue. And then you want to end with the solutions that you plan on proposing in committee. If you've got this amazing solution, you've got like a name for it, it's a really cool program, put that in your position paper. Then the chair will absolutely know that that solution was yours when they read the paper, and they'll see kind of how well you had prepared to bring that solution into your committee once you got there. Moving forward through the rest of these questions, in the last kind of 2 minutes I've got, what is the attire at MUN conferences? This is getting into attending conferences. Traditionally, they say Western business attire. So basically you can wear a suit, you can rock a pantsuit, you can wear a dress, a blazer, anything that comes across as professional. Whatever the definition of professional may mean to you, dress professionally and dress like a world leader. One of the coolest things about Model UN is you're not a student anymore. You are like the UN ambassador from yada, yada, yada country. Dress to impress. Literally step into the shoes of that person, and it'll also help you to bring out that confidence and really feel ready in terms of going into that committee. How can you join Model UN if your school doesn't have a club? Great question. Best Delegate has actually a Model UN Teams program this year that you can join up until next week. We have registration still open. So if you go to learnmodelun.com, we have some virtual Model UN teams if that would interest you. Other ways to get involved: you can register for conferences as an independent delegate. You do not need a Model UN team to attend a conference. So many conferences have ways for you to register on your own. If it's in person, you probably have to bring /100% have to bring, if it's a 4-day one, a parent or a guardian or a chaperone. But aside from that, you can absolutely attend any conference that you so choose. You are not limited by not having a team. Should we write our speeches beforehand? Yes. Your opening speech, I recommend it. It's your first opportunity to impress the chair, show the committee who you are, use it well. Plus, if you prepare it beforehand, at least some form of bullet points, you'll be far more confident in terms of your delivery. All right, let's see. How should I prepare a background guide as a student president? The elements of the background guide that I told you were looking for at the start of this webinar, that's exactly what you want to put in your background guide. So choose a topic that you're super passionate about, something you want to dive deeply into, and that kind of stuff. How do you go about being a solo delegate? That is a great question. In terms of being a solo delegate, prepare all of these elements, and it's literally the same as double deling, except you're missing that extra person. You've got this. Just make sure that you balance out the time between when you're speaking, when you're writing. Don't leave the room if it's a solo del for an hour straight and not show your face because you got so into resolution writing. The chair should continue to know you exist. So find a balance between giving speeches, writing resolutions, leaving the room for unmods, and all of that. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna take one last question if I see anything. Let's see. Okay. In that case, what I'm going to do is go ahead and share all of these links in one for you guys, and then quickly explain them to you in just a minute. There's some links there. There's some links there. Okay. And then to quickly head back into these slides. Okay. Cool. So to close this out for all of you, and if you have any further questions as well, definitely feel free to shoot us an email at support@bestdelegate.com. We are happy to answer your questions. Sean Beer, I saw your question in the chat. I will get back to you on that ASAP. I have your email address. I got you. So in terms of additional resources, the links for many of which I just shared. There are tons of guides and resources on our website. We have a conference selection strategy guide. We have a guide that matches this webinar with a new addition to be emailed to all of you who registered for this event, as well as the recording. We've got a debating diplomatically guide. We have a crisis guide for whoever it was that asked that question. Advanced guides, all of that. Definitely feel free to use those. And again, the link for that is in the chat. We also, sometime in the next couple weeks, will be releasing a one-page cheat sheet to Model UN. We are super excited about this. It basically breaks down everything you need to know when you walk into a Model UN committee on one page. In terms of key terms, information about your committee. It's got the committee flow on there, fill in the blanks for making motions, places to put your ideas for moderated caucus topics, an easy place to list your solutions, as well as places to write your opening speech. And again, with the QR codes. So the sheet has so much more information on it that fits on a page. So definitely keep an eye out for this, as this will be sent out via email, and it's going to be another great tool in terms of helping you all feel confident before walking into your next conference. We have a ton of training videos on our website. If you would like to be trained by somebody who isn't me, for example, and learn more about all of these topics, definitely feel free to check those out. They are an awesome resource. We've got tons of mini MUN lessons, basically simple ways to level up your skills. We have monthly conferences. So we've got monthly virtual conferences at both the training and the invitational level. And at the invitational level, we also have a couple crisis topics. These are $40 a student, and they're essentially 6 hours, so 12 to 6 p.m. Eastern on once a month, typically Saturdays. So they are a great way to do Model UN for a day, really get practicing, get involved, and have some fun with it. For those of you who've never done Model UN and would like more practice, we also have MUN 101 workshops a month. You learn the fundamentals of Model UN and get to practice in 3 hours. Good times all around. And for those of you who are advisors, starting a new club who might want some help, we have a new club accelerator that we're offering in terms of working with schools, and this is at a cost as well. So it's going to be 10 hours with an expert mentor. You get resources. We help you jumpstart your program. So we do a 2-hour planning call to set you up. We then train your students with a private workshop and then do a private conference in terms of getting your students involved. Great way to kind of jumpstart beginners in terms of this here Model UN experience. We have a podcast. We're very excited about the podcast. If you listen to podcasts and want to listen to a Model UN podcast, you can tune in weekly. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all of the many places you might find your podcast. And we have more upcoming free events. If you happened to enjoy this event, and I'm so happy to see that so many of you have stuck this out, thank you so much for listening to me for the last hour. We have a Model UN College Fair coming up on December 5th. That's going to be a great way to figure out which colleges you might want to attend. And they're going to talk a little bit more about their Model UN programs as well. In my introduction, I said I attended Georgetown. I fell in love with Georgetown because of their high school conference naming and because of the interactions that I had with staffers. We're going to make that happen for all of you at this college fair in terms of bringing in awesome collegiate Model UN delegates to tell you a little bit more about the schools that they attend and why you too should go there. And then on the 23rd of January, for those of you who had questions about winning awards, you're definitely going to want to register for this one. We're hosting a How to Win Best Delegate webinar that'll feature award-winning Model UN panelists and cover the steps to take you from feeling prepared to feeling absolutely confident that you can walk in and have a solid chance at getting the gavel. So keep in mind, upcoming webinars. And finally, feel free to get in touch. You can email us at support@bestdelegate.com if you have any questions, if you'd like to suggest ideas for future webinars, all of that fun stuff. You can call us at 646-308-1411. My colleague Tony is wonderful, and she would love to talk you through our program offerings and anything along those lines. Or you can schedule a call with us. And with that, that brings us to the end of this webinar, and I know I've held you 3 minutes late. So thank you all so much for coming. I loved having all of you here and hopefully teaching you how to prepare for your next Model UN conference in less than 2 hours. I'm so excited for all of you to take what you've learned, take these skills and have a successful time and a fun time at your next Model UN conference because MUN is fun. Yay. Haha, no laughs, thank you. Yeah, laugh emojis, all that. Have fun at your next conference, have fun for the rest of the week, have fun training your students, have fun attending as a delegate. And I hope that you all got something out of this and that all of these resources will help all of you along your Model UN journeys. With that, I'm going to